So a couple of months ago, end of last year, I got the opportunity to check out a pretty awesome project that blew my mind. The project is a mix of community space and design and research hub. And I really had the feeling to get a glimpse into the future, an open and inclusive future, the kind of future I want for all of us. The project is called Dynamic Land. And their mission is to incubate a humane dynamic medium that's accessible to all. So what does that mean? Dynamic Land is a space in downtown Oakland, California. It's a communal computer, a computer that you can walk into. And instead of dealing with interfaces or apps, you're interacting and programming with everyday objects. So there are no screens, no devices, nothing that blocks you from the other people in the room. Just ordinary physical objects like paper, scissors, clay, toy cars, whatever you can imagine. And these objects come to life through technology in the ceiling. This is what communal computing at Dynamic Land looks like. Each scrap of paper has the capabilities of a full computer while remaining a fully functional scrap of paper. Since code is visible, people don't only start to interact with the code and the paper, but also with one another. So this medium, this interactive medium, takes people down a road from playing to experimenting, crafting, remixing, and programming. Programs are real things that you can touch, and everyone is an author. And that is quite different to how we're used to developing technology with an expert on one side and the user on the other side, a lot of times closed code that you can't access. The nonprofit Dynamic Land wants to become a hub for citizens. So they want dynamic lands all over the place. A hub for citizens where they can meet to deliberate, to discuss, to program, explore technologies, and many more. And what's also pretty exciting, I felt, is that they have a really long timeline. So their timeline goes 50 years into the future. And I know barely any non-profit projects or community projects that have a timeline that reaches that far. And of course, that's a lot of times due to scarce resources. We heard it earlier in the journalist discussion, that if you have to focus on the day-to-day, if you have to raise funds, then it's very hard to focus on the long-term future. This is why today I want to talk about how to speculate about the future. Because by speculating about the future, you can get really useful insights for the present and learn how to reshape and rethink today. So for example, if we think about the future, we can reshape technology in order that the human is in their center and not the machine like Dynamic Land does it. So forecasting is by no means something new for all of us. We're super used to forecasting, weather forecasts or risk forecasts. But forecasting always looks at patterns in the past. So they look at patterns in the past and they extrapolate these trends into the future. So whenever we use data from the past or from the present to use it for a machine or to train machine learning models and other things, we kind of hard code these biases of the past into the future. And we've heard about it yesterday in Philippe's presentation that it's really hard to get rid of these biases. So forecasting is somehow limiting because you're always looking at the past. It gives you particular endpoints and scenarios, while speculating about the future is really about narratives, about immersing in stories. So let's widen our view and look at some alternative futures. A little bit of theory before we start. This is a graphic that gets quoted a lot by Joseph Forrest, and it shows all the arrays, like all the possible arrays when you think about a future. So there's the possible futures, and within these possible futures, there's a smaller cone of plausible futures. And within the plausible futures, there's only a kind of very narrow cone of probable futures. And when you look at the preferable futures, then it has only a very tiny overlap with the probable futures. So that's always important to keep in mind when you're speculating or thinking about the future. So how does it work? How do we come up with future scenarios? A tool that is used by many, and we've heard it in the introduction, is speculative design. And the origins of speculative design lie within a department called computer-related design, which kind of forms the basis for what we now know as interaction design. So designers are somehow predestined. They are futurists by nature because they constantly create things that are not yet of this world. To design is therefore an exercise in futurity. Speculative design constantly interacts with other fields, with other related practices. So it uses methodologies from those practices that are accessible and appropriate at any given moment. And stories become to life through props, through visuals, through film, whatever helps to create a narrative that people understand and that is easy graspable. Like writers use language, designers use print objects, film, installations, and clothing. So speculative design provides a method to probe, explore, and critique these futures and the technologies they embrace. And it's not about answering questions. It's not about finding solutions to problems, because that's what designers usually do. With speculative design, it's about asking good questions and using what if to come up with good questions and good scenarios. And in order to come up with these future scenarios, you somehow have to uncouple yourself from the past, from the biases that I mentioned, from mistakes that we've been making in the past. But you also have to find a balance, because you want to use this knowledge and know-how that you know. So just think about an often quoted example, Henry Ford. When he came up with the automobile, he somehow had to uncouple himself from the thought that the horse is the main means of transportation. And similar to that, we also have to uncouple ourselves when we come up with future scenarios. So by speculating, designers rethink worlds, systems, and products. Let's look at an example. This is a project from the London-based design studio Superflux, and it's called Uninvited Guests. And in this example, they explore IoT devices in the context of elderly healthcare and remote tracking. So their main character in this film is Thomas. Thomas is 70 years old. He's retired, his wife had passed away last year, and his children live abroad and sent him some smart devices that help to track his fitness, his health, his nutrition intake. They just want to make sure that he's fine. But Thomas is also fiercely independent. He loves living in his organized mess. And these devices somehow disturb him. He doesn't like the orders that they give him. So the devices in the film are in neon colors. This is, for example, a walking cane, or he also got this smart fork. And with the smart fork, whatever he eats, it counts the salt. Like a fitness tracker, it basically counts your nutrition intake, the fat intake, and it would give him like warning signals. Reduce salt. You've been eating too much salt. And for Thomas, these devices become uninvited guests, like they control his everyday life and he starts to hate them. So he comes up with creative ways of tricking them. So instead of eating his not so healthy diet with the smart fork, he's just steering in a bowl of salad in order to make his children happy. And with the walking cane, he gives it to a child from the neighborhood who goes for a walk and earns some pocket money. So what is Superflux trying to explore with these narratives, with these films? And I really recommend checking them out. So they are firstly looking into what relationships do we form with these smart devices that enter our homes? Do we hate them? Do they become family members? They secondly look at what role does human agency play in a time where smart forks gain agency? And thirdly, they look at how do these smart devices change our routines, our preferences, our culture? So what influence do they have on us? And after Superflux released the film series, the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, got in touch with them because they were interested in exploring the future of their clients and of their services. So looking forward in time allows us to imagine problems that are still beneath the surface. Having explored potential scenarios might sometimes lead to changes in your products and the visions you have for those products. And prototypes can spark interesting critical discussions and debates. So what happens when we don't engage with the future? we a lot of times end up creating something that has unintended biases. I quickly want to go into a story about a company that used a science fiction movie as a blueprint for their work. The movie is Minority Report. Some of you might remember it. It's from 2002. Steven Spielberg was the director, and you can see here Tom Cruise was in the main role. He was playing a cop that used a pre-crime system in order to predict crimes. So he sees crimes that are happening in the future on this fancy panel. And these crimes, and some of you might remember, are dreamt up from gifted humans with precognition. They lie in this kind of swimming pool. But that's just a very short narrative. What's interesting about Minority Report is that a company called Exxon, formerly known as Taser, they just changed their name last year, uses Minority Report, RoboCop, science fiction movies as a blueprint for some of their products and their company vision. So their headquarters, for example, has a lot of elements of the movies, so it feels like walking into these science fiction scenarios. And Exxon is not only known for the Taser gun that they invented, but they are also the world's largest manufacturer of body cams. And you can see it on the top. So this cop, this police officer, mainly in the United States, is wearing a body cam and is recording whenever he has to go somewhere to an incident or to a crime scene. So Exxon has thousands of hours of recorded material, and they are now using it to train machine learning models in order to predict crimes. And this is also now something super new, right? Predictive policing, we've heard about it. And again, studies show that it's kind of dangerous because you have these biases that are baked into these machine learning models. ProPublica released some amazing studies last year. I urge you to look them up and to read them. They are pretty scary, but also pretty insightful. Racial bias in predictive policing and risk assessments. So if we implement these technologies without properly thinking about the future, about pre-release trials, we don't know what implications they might have on our society. And the example of Exxon and its sci-fi fantasies is a nightmare on many levels. Yesterday on my way here, I read an article in the Washington Post that said that Exxon announced that they now want to look into facial recognition in live video. Another sci-fi scenario that's probably not the preferable future for many of us. So the Exxon example shows that we have to watch out and raise awareness about what future scenarios these companies are buying into and what effects they might have for our societies and for our lives. Okay, I have to wrap up on a more positive note. So what's next for speculative design? We at Mozilla, like other companies, have been experimenting with it. This is a series of voice-enabled internet devices where we researched what's the next step, what are futures for voice-enabled internet devices. The series is called Our Electric Friends. But speculative design is not reserved to specific disciplines, quite contrary. It can be useful for policymakers, for governments, that need new tools to become more future-facing in their decisions and to go beyond the next 15 years. And the example up here is an example from the Digital Minister's office in Taiwan, where they are using speculative design in order to figure out new forms of participation and deliberation, to explore these new forms together with citizens. Here are 2 projects. And through speculation, governments can not only find out what possible consequences some actions might have, but together with the public, and I think that's really interesting, they can materialize all the fears and hopes that citizens have about the future and discuss and explore them. And I want to leave you with a quote by Fiona Raby and Anthony Dunn, who were leading pioneers of critical design. They say, "We believe that by speculating more, at all levels of society and exploring alternative scenarios, reality will become more malleable. And although the future cannot be predicted, we can help set in place today factors that will increase the probability of a more desirable future happening." Thank you very much.